The silence was the best part. It wasn't an empty silence, but one thick with the dust of a century, fragrant with the scent of age in timber and cold lime plaster. Up on the scaffolding, 3 stories above the velvet-roped seats of the Orpheum Grand, Alara Vance felt a sense of peace she found nowhere else on earth. Her world was reduced to the 2 square feet of ornate plaster ceiling before her, a constellation of faded acanthus leaves and chipped rosettes crying out for a steady hand. With the delicate touch of a surgeon, she applied a thin layer of consolidation mixture to a hairline fracture threatening to cleave a cherub's wing in 2. Her breath was a soft, steady rhythm, her movements economical. This was her passion, her calling, architectural conservation. She didn't just fix old buildings, she listened to their stories and coaxed them back to life, preserving the integrity of their foundations. It was methodical, patient work that rewarded precision and punished haste. In a world that felt increasingly chaotic, it was her sanctuary. She was so absorbed, tracing the boast of a painter's brushstroke from 1925, that the vibration in her pocket felt like a violent intrusion. She sighed, carefully setting down her palette knife before pulling her phone from her dusty overalls. The screen read, "Mom calling." A familiar knot tightened in her stomach. A call from her mother during work hours was never just a call. It was a summons. "Hi, Mom," she said, her voice echoing slightly in the vast, empty theater. "Alara, thank God. I need you to come home." Carol Vance's voice was a blade of practiced anxiety, honed to perfection over decades. There was no greeting, no preamble. "Mom, I'm at work. I'm on a scaffold. Is everything okay?" "It's a family emergency. I can't get into it over the phone. Just come home. Now." Alara squeezed her eyes shut, the scent of plaster dust sharp in her nostrils. A family emergency could mean anything from her father misplacing the television remote to her brother needing a ride because his car was once again in the shop. "Can't it wait until this evening? I'm at a critical point here." "A critical point?" Her mother's scoff was sharp enough to cut glass. "Alara, this is your family. Liam is here. We need you. Please, just for once, can you put us first?" For once? The question was so outrageously false, it stole Alara's breath. Her entire life had been a masterclass in putting them first. She glanced at the fractured cherub wing, a delicate piece of history waiting for her care. Then she looked down at the ghost-like, dust-sheeted seats below. The choice, as always, wasn't really a choice at all. "I'll be there as soon as I can," she said, the words tasting like resignation. "An hour." She didn't wait for a reply before ending the call. The perfect, story-filled silence of the theater now felt mocking. With a heavy sigh, she began the careful process of cleaning her tools and securing her workspace. The cherub would have to wait. The family, as always, would not. The Vance family home was a testament to her mother's aspirations. A pristine 2-story colonial in a subdivision where the lawns were uniformly green and the houses were shades of tasteful beige. It was a stage set for a perfect life. Inside, however, the air was suffocatingly thick with unspoken rules and carefully curated narratives. Alara let herself in with her key. The house was spotless, a landscape of polished wood and gleaming surfaces where no object was ever out of place. In the living room, her father, David, sat in his worn leather armchair, staring blankly at a muted television. He was a man who had long ago ceded all emotional territory to his wife, retreating into a passive silence that was its own form of neglect. He looked up as she entered, his expression one of weary relief. "She's in the kitchen," he mumbled, as if that explained everything. Alara found her mother and brother huddled over the granite island. Liam, her younger brother by 2 years, was the sun around which the Vance family orbited. He had a magnetic charm that seemed to blind their parents to the trail of reckless decisions and financial messes that followed him everywhere. At 26, he still possessed the unearned confidence of a teenager who had never faced a real consequence. Today, that confidence was on full display. And then, boom, Liam was saying, gesturing expansively with one hand while holding a craft beer in the other. We just closed another round of seed funding. The VCs are eating up the concept of synergistic disruption in the micro-lending space. Carol hung on his every word, her face glowing with pride she never showed for Alara's slow, steady achievements. "Oh, Liam, that's wonderful! My brilliant boy!" Alara leaned against the doorframe, her dusty work clothes feeling entirely out of place in the sterile environment. "I'm here," she announced quietly. "What's the emergency?" Carol turned, her smile tightening slightly. "Oh, Alara, good. Don't stand there like a stranger. Come in." She gestured to Alara's clothes. "Honestly, that job of yours, you look like you've been crawling through a chimney." "It's called work, Mom," Alara said, the automatic defense springing to her lips. "Well, your brother has some wonderful news," Carol said, deftly changing the subject. Liam gave her a lazy grin. "Ellie, just the woman I wanted to see. Things are moving fast. The beta for Link Up Lend is launching next month. It's going to be huge." Alara had heard versions of this speech for years. There was always a huge project, a game-changing idea that required a small bridge loan from his parents or, more often than not, from her. "That's great, Liam," she said, forcing a smile. "So the emergency is good news?" Carol waved a dismissive hand. "That wasn't the emergency. That came up after. The emergency is that the caterer for your father's retirement party canceled. I needed you here to help me call new ones." Alara stared at her. She had left a delicate, time-sensitive restoration project driven 45 minutes across town for a catering issue. The knot in her stomach coiled into a cold, hard stone. "You pulled me from work for that? Mom, I told you I was at a critical stage. And I told you this was important," Carol snapped, her victimhood dialed up to its usual intensity. "This party is for your father. It's the least you can do to show you care." "You could have texted me, and I would have made calls on my lunch break," Alara said, her voice low and tight. "Don't use that tone with me," Carol warned. "We got it handled anyway. Liam helped." Of course, Liam helped. Liam, whose version of help likely involved a 5-minute Google search before he launched back into his monologue about venture capitalists and synergistic disruption. "Actually," Liam chimed in, leaning against the counter with an air of practiced nonchalance, "speaking of things moving fast, my landlord's a real hard-ass about the rent being on the 1st of the month, and with the funding not clearing until the 5th, I'm in a bit of a tight spot." Alara closed her eyes. Here it was, the real reason she'd been summoned. "How tight?" she asked, her voice flat. "Just a couple grand. To tide me over," he said breezily. "You know I'm good for it." She didn't know that at all. She still hadn't seen a dime of the $400 she'd loaned him for car repairs 3 months ago. Before she could answer, her father shuffled into the kitchen. "Everything all right in here?" David asked, his gaze flitting nervously between his wife and daughter. "Everything is fine," Carol said, directing a pointed look at Alara. "Liam was just telling us about his incredible success. We should be celebrating." She opened the refrigerator and pulled out a bottle of champagne. "We'll toast to my son, the future millionaire." As her mother popped the cork, Alara felt a profound sense of invisibility. Her own life, her own dreams, they didn't exist in this house. She was a supporting character, a utility. Her greatest purpose in their eyes was to ensure the smooth trajectory of their golden child. She thought of the small, dilapidated cottage she had been saving for since she graduated college. It was a wreck, with a sagging porch and peeling paint, but it was a historic gem from the 1890s. Every paycheck, a significant portion was siphoned into a high-yield savings account labeled Cottage Fund. It had just crossed the $85,000 mark last month, enough for the down payment and initial stabilization work. It was her secret, a tangible dream that kept her sane. Giving Liam $2,000 would be a step back, another chip away at the life she was so desperately trying to build for herself. Before she could formulate a refusal, the sharp, jarring ring of the landline cut through the air. Carol, champagne bottle in hand, answered it on speakerphone. "Hello? Is this the Vance residence?" a man's stern voice asked. "Yes, it is. This is Detective Miller with the Financial Crimes Unit. I'm calling about a Liam Vance." The champagne bottle slipped from Carol's fingers, shattering on the tile floor. A geyser of foam and glass sprayed across the pristine kitchen. Liam's confident smirk vanished, replaced by a sickly, chalk-white pallor. "What is this about?" David asked, his voice trembling. "We have a warrant for his arrest." The silence that followed was heavier and more terrifying than any Alara had ever experienced. It was the sound of a carefully constructed world falling apart. Moments later, the doorbell rang. Two sharp, authoritative chimes that sealed their fate. The arrest was a blur of surreal, horrifying efficiency. Two uniformed officers, polite but implacable, stood in the foyer while Detective Miller explained the charges in cold, legal terms: felony embezzlement, multiple counts of wire fraud. Liam's seed funding wasn't from venture capitalists, it was from a group of local business owners he had lured into a fraudulent investment scheme. His tech startup was nothing more than a shell company designed to funnel their money into his own accounts. Liam, stripped of his charisma, looked like a scared little boy. He stammered denials as they handcuffed him, his eyes pleading with his parents. Carol was hysterical, a storm of tears and accusations, blaming his business partners, the investors, the police, everyone but the son standing before her in handcuffs. David was frozen, a statue of disbelief and shock. Ilara was the only one who moved. She found her mother's purse, located her wallet, and handed the detective Liam's driver's license. She spoke to the officers in a calm, steady voice, asking what would happen next, where he was being taken. Her composure seemed to infuriate her mother. "How can you be so calm?" Carol shrieked at her as they led Liam out the door. "They're taking your brother! They're taking your brother!" Ilara didn't answer. She was watching the flashing blue and red lights paint horrifying streaks across the perfect beige siding of the house, and all she could feel was a profound, chilling numbness. That numbness carried her through the next few hours, a protective shell against the frantic phone calls to lawyers and her mother's escalating hysterics. They ended up in the cold, sterile waiting area of the county detention center, the air thick with the smell of antiseptic and quiet despair. The family lawyer, a man named Mr. Davies, whom they had on retainer, finally emerged from a back room looking grim. "The charges are serious," he said, his voice low. "The DA is not playing around. They have bank records, witness statements. It's not good." "But you can get him out, right?" Carol demanded, her hands twisting a shredded tissue. "We can post bail," Davis said, "but given the severity of the charges and him being a potential flight risk, the judge set it high. The bond is $850,000. David choked. "What? That's insane. We don't have that kind of money." "You don't need the full amount," the lawyer explained patiently. "You need to pay 10% to a bail bondsman. That's $85,000. It has to be in cash or a cashier's check, and it's non-refundable." $85,000. The number hung in the air, a death sentence to a dream. Alara felt the blood drain from her face. It was the exact amount. The exact amount she had in her cottage fund. A coincidence so cruel, so specific, it felt like a targeted strike from the universe. She saw the moment the same realization dawned on her parents. It was a slow, sickening turn of their heads, their gazes locking onto her not with hope, but with expectation. The weight of their stare was a physical thing, pinning her to the cheap plastic chair. "Alara," her father began, his voice raspy, "your savings, you've always been so good with money." "No," Alara whispered, the word barely audible. That's for my house, for my future." Her mother's face, tear-streaked and blotchy, hardened into a mask of grim determination. She lunged forward, grabbing Alara's hands. Her grip was like iron. "Your future?" Carol's voice was a venomous hiss. "Your brother's future is on the line. His entire life is about to be destroyed, and you're talking about a house? It's just money, Alara. We are talking about family. We are talking about your brother rotting in a cage with criminals." "He is a criminal, Mom," Alara said, the stark truth of it shocking even herself. Carol slapped her, not a theatrical tap, but a hard, stinging blow that cracked across the silent waiting room. Alara's head snapped to the side, her cheek burning. David flinched, but said nothing. He simply looked away, his silence a profound act of betrayal. Tears of rage and humiliation sprang to Alara's eyes. Her mother leaned in close, her voice dropping to a desperate, manipulative whisper. "You are the only one who can fix this. You are his big sister. It is your duty. We will pay you back. I swear to you, we will find a way." Alara knew it was a lie. They wouldn't pay her back. They couldn't. They would absorb her sacrifice just as they had absorbed every other one she had ever made, and the debt would be forgotten, replaced by the next demand. She looked from her mother's pleading, desperate face to her father's averted gaze. She was trapped. She had always been trapped. She slowly met her mother's eyes, the fire in her own dying out, replaced by the familiar cold ash of resignation. Her mother saw her shift. She saw her victory. Her expression softened, the manipulation turning to cloying affection. "Oh, sweetie, I knew you'd understand," Carol cooed, stroking the cheek she had just struck. Alara pulled her hand away, the touch making her skin crawl. She felt disconnected from her own body, a spectator watching herself be consumed. The cherub's wing, the quiet theater, the dream of a small cottage with a sagging porch, it all felt a million miles away, a life that belonged to someone else. Here, in this cold, sterile room, there was only the crushing weight of family. Her mother saw her silence as hesitation and delivered the final, devastating blow. "Are you going to let your brother rot in jail and destroy this family, Alara?" Carol's voice was thick with manufactured tears. "After everything we've done for you?" The drive home from the detention center was a study in suffocating silence. Alara drove her own car, following the taillights of her parents' sedan. Her cheek throbbed, a dull, rhythmic ache that was less a physical pain and more a constant, burning reminder of the afternoon's violation. The slap was a punctuation mark at the end of a lifelong sentence of emotional servitude. It was the sound of a line being crossed, a sound that echoed louder in the silence than her mother's subsequent hollow promises of repayment. Back in the sanctuary of her small apartment, the silence was different. It was her own. Here, surrounded by books on historical architecture and the earthy scent of clay from her pottery wheel, she could almost pretend she was a different person, a person whose life wasn't a resource to be endlessly plundered. She kicked off her dusty boots and walked on numb legs to the small desk crammed into a corner of her living room. Pinned to the corkboard above it was a brochure, its corners softened with handling. Historic Millwood Cottage, circa 1892, a unique restoration opportunity. She unpinned it, her fingers tracing the faded photograph of the house. It was a disaster, objectively. A glorious, beautiful disaster. The porch sagged like a tired old man, the roof was a patchwork of moss and missing shingles, and the windows were clouded with the cataracts of age. But Ilara saw none of that. She saw the elegant bones of the structure, the hand-carved newel post visible through the grimy front window, the original clapboard siding hidden beneath layers of peeling paint. She saw its story, its potential. She saw a foundation that, unlike her own family's, was solid. She sank into her desk chair, the brochure held loosely in her hand. $85,000. It had taken her 6 years to save. 6 years of packing her own lunch, of driving a 10-year-old car, of turning down vacations with friends, of pouring every spare dollar into the high-yield account she'd named Cottage Fund. It wasn't just money. It was a physical manifestation of her discipline, her hope, her quiet rebellion. It was the price of her freedom. And now they were demanding it, not to save a life, not to cure a disease, but to spring her reckless, criminal brother from a mess of his own making, all to preserve the fragile, fictional veneer of their perfect family. Her phone buzzed on the desk, the screen lighting up with a text from her mother. "The lawyers said the bondsman can meet us in the morning. You'll need to be at the bank right when it opens. We're counting on you." There was no apology, no acknowledgement of the slap, of the sacrifice. Just logistics, a cold, transactional command. Ilara felt a wave of nausea. She thought of saying no. The word formed in her mind, a single powerful syllable. No. She could text it back right now. She could turn off her phone, block their numbers, and disappear into her own life. But the thought was immediately swamped by a lifetime of conditioning. The guilt, expertly planted and cultivated since her childhood, rose like a toxic tide. "You're tearing this family apart after everything we've done for you. Selfish." The words were her mother's, but the voice was her own. She dropped her head into her hands, the rough paper of the brochure crinkling against her forehead. The cottage, her dream, seemed to mock her with its promise of a peace she felt she'd never deserve. The fight went out of her, replaced by a profound and hollow exhaustion. She knew, with sickening certainty, what she was going to do. The next morning, the bank felt like a morgue. The air was cool and still, the polite smiles of the tellers like those of practiced undertakers. Ilara stood in the short line, her stomach a pit of acid. She had not slept. Every time she had closed her eyes, she'd seen either the sagging porch of the cottage or the cold fury in her mother's face. "Hi, how can I help you today?" the teller asked, her name tag reading Brenda. "I need to get a cashier's check," Ilara said, her voice sounding foreign in her own ears. "For $85,000. Brenda's professional smile didn't falter, but her eyebrows rose a fraction of an inch. "Of course. May I see your ID and debit card?" Ilara pushed the plastic cards across the counter. The process was agonizingly slow. There were forms to sign, confirmations to be made. With each stroke of the pen, Ilara felt a piece of her future flaking away. Brenda tapped at her keyboard, the quiet clicks counting down the final seconds of her dream's existence. "All right, Miss Vance," Brenda said finally, sliding a crisp, pale blue cashier's check and a receipt under the glass. "Here you are." Ilara looked at the check. Her name was printed on it, but the name after "pay to the order of" was a bail bonds company she'd never heard of before yesterday. It was done. The cottage fund was gone, liquidated into the single, sterile slip of paper. She folded it carefully and put it in her purse, the action feeling as final as closing a coffin lid. She didn't say thank you. She couldn't. She simply turned and walked out of the bank, the cheerful bell above the door chiming her exit from the life she had been trying to build. She met her parents in the parking lot of a strip mall a few blocks from the bondsman's office. They were waiting in their car, her father in the driver's seat staring straight ahead, her mother tapping impatiently at her phone. Ilara pulled up beside them and got out, the check held in a white-knuckled grip. She walked to her mother's window and tapped on the glass. Carol rolled it down, her face a mask of strained impatience. "Do you have it?" Ilara didn't speak. She just held out the check. Carol snatched it from her hand, her eyes scanning it to make sure the amount was correct. A wave of pure, unadulterated relief washed over her features, erasing any trace of the previous day's desperation. It was the look of a problem solved.
"Thank God," she breathed, turning to her husband. "David, she got it. It's all here." Her father turned, not to Ilara, but to his wife. He reached over and squeezed Carol's shoulder, a gesture of shared victory. Then, almost as an afterthought, he glanced at Ilara. "We knew you'd do the right thing," he said, his voice even. It wasn't a thank you, it was an affirmation, a statement that order had been restored, that she had fulfilled her designated role. Her mother was already dialing the bondsman. "We have the check," she said into the phone, her voice bright and efficient. "We're 5 minutes away. Yes, we'll see you then." She hung up and finally looked at Ilara, her eyes clear and focused. The storm had passed. "Thank you, sweetie. You saved your brother. You saved this family." The words were correct, but the tone was wrong. It was the kind of thanks one gives to a delivery driver or a bank teller, an impersonal acknowledgement of a service rendered. There was no recognition of the monumental sacrifice, no empathy for the dream that had just been executed in broad daylight. They didn't see her pain. They didn't even see her. They only saw the check. And that was it. That was the last straw. A cold, hard clarity washed over Ilara, so sharp and sudden it felt like a slap. But this one was internal. It was the awakening. The gratitude she hadn't really expected, but had perhaps subconsciously hoped for, wasn't just absent. It was a conceptual impossibility for them. She was a resource, and the resource had been successfully tapped. The transaction was complete. Without another word, Ilara turned, walked back to her car, and got in. She didn't look back. She watched in her rearview mirror as her parents' car pulled out of the parking lot and headed toward the bondsman, toward Liam, their golden boy, their real child. For the first time, she didn't feel guilt or sadness. She felt a profound Arctic rage. She drove for 10 minutes before the rage gave way to a wrenching, full-body sob. She pulled into the parking lot of a deserted park, the car shuddering as she slammed it in the park. The grief was a physical thing, a giant hand squeezing her lungs, forcing the air out in ragged, ugly gasps. She wept for the cottage, for the years of sacrifice, for the little girl who had always tried so hard to be good enough. She wept for the woman who had just been erased in a bank parking lot. When the tears finally subsided, leaving her hollowed out and raw, only the cold anger remained. It was a clean, pure anger, with no room for guilt or doubt. It was a foundation. Her hands were shaking as she pulled out her phone and scrolled to a name she should have called 24 hours ago. Anya Sharma answered on the second ring. "Hey, Ilara, what's up? You went quiet yesterday." "They did it, Anya," Ilara whispered, her voice hoarse. "They took it all." There was a pause. Anya, a corporate lawyer whose defining characteristic was a complete intolerance for bullshit, processed this. "Wait, you gave them the money. All of it. Ilara, we talked about this." "My mom, she..." Ilara's voice broke. "She slapped me. And then she..." "She what?" Anya's voice was suddenly sharp as steel. "What did she do?" "She made me feel like Like Liam's life was my fault. Like I owed them this. Ilara, listen to me, Anya said, her voice dangerously calm. Where are you? Are you safe? I'm in my car. I just gave them the check. And what did they say? Ilara let out a bitter, humorless laugh. My dad said he knew I'd do the right thing. And my mom was already on the phone with the bondsman. They didn't even see me on. It was just a transaction. The silence on the other end of the line was heavy. Ilara could practically hear the gears turning in her friend's brilliant legal mind. Okay, Anya said finally. Okay, good. Good? Ilara asked, confused. What's good about any of this? It's good because you're angry. It's good because you're finally seeing them for what they are. They didn't just take your money, Ilara. They assaulted you. And that check wasn't a gift. It was extortion. We're done playing defense. What are you talking about? It's over. The money's gone. No, it's not, Anya said firmly. It's just changed hands. Now we legally document its TAF back to you. I'm emailing you a document. It's a promissory note. Simple, standard, ironclad. It states that the $85,000 is a personal loan from you to Carol and David Vance, and that it is secured against their primary residence. Their house is paid off, right? Yes, years ago, Ilara whispered, her heart starting to pound. Perfect. That means they have full equity. You're going to print this out, you're going to go back to their house, and you are going to have them sign it. What? I can't do that. They'll never agree. Yes, they will, Anya insisted, because they're distracted. They're euphoric. They're about to get their precious son back. You are going to tell them that for a transaction of this size, your bank requires a formal note for its records to avoid it being flagged as a suspicious activity. Tell them it's a formality, a piece of red tape. Lie to them, Ilara. Use their own language. They won't even read it. They'll just sign it to get you out of their hair so they can go pick up Liam. Anya's plan was audacious, terrifying, and utterly brilliant. It felt both impossible and like the only logical next step. Anya, I don't know. This is not revenge, Ilara. Anya's voice softened slightly but lost none of its resolve. This is armor. This is your foundation. You restore old buildings for a living. You know what happens when the foundation is rotten. You don't patch it, you rebuild it. This is you pouring the concrete for your own life. Now go print the damn document. An hour later, Ilara stood on her parents' immaculate front porch, a manila envelope in her trembling hands. Her heart hammered against her ribs. This was a different kind of fear. It wasn't the fear of her mother's anger. It was the fear of her own power. She rang the bell. Her father opened the door, a flicker of surprise in his eyes. Ilara, I thought you'd gone home. I had to go to the bank again, she said, amazed at how steady her voice sounded. She stepped inside. For a withdrawal this large, they need a signed document for their records to prove it was a loan and not something else. It's just a formality. She pulled the 2-page document from the envelope. Her mother came bustling out of the kitchen, her purse on her shoulder, car keys in hand. What's this? Carol asked, her focus clearly on getting out the door. We need to go. Liam's being processed for release. The bank needs this signed, Ilara repeated, holding out the papers and a pen. It's just red tape. They need your signatures confirming you received the funds as a loan and not something else. Carol waved it away. Just leave it on the counter, we'll sign it later. They said they need it today, or they might have to freeze my accounts, pending an inquiry, Ilara lied, the words flowing with surprising ease. It was a page from her mother's own book, a vague but official-sounding threat to create urgency. Her father, ever compliant, took the pen and added his own signature next to his wife's. He slid the paper back across the polished granite island to Ilara. It was done. In less than 30 seconds, they had signed a legally binding contract that secured her $85,000 sacrifice against the only real asset they had. The hubris of it was breathtaking. Ilara carefully folded the document and slid it back into the envelope. She felt no triumph, no satisfaction, just the cold, heavy weight of a secret. "Okay," she said, her voice a near whisper. "That's all." "Good," her mother said, already moving toward the garage door. "We'll call you when we have Liam back home." She watched them go. She stood alone in the perfect silent house, the envelope clutched in her hand. It felt heavier than a cashier's check. It felt like a weapon. She had poured the concrete, just as Anya said. She had built herself a firewall. But as she let herself out and locked the door behind her, she knew she had also just lit a fuse. The silent burden was no longer just hers to bear. She had secretly and legally handed it right back. The 2 months that followed Liam's release were a masterclass in avoidance. Ilara constructed a new life within the shell of her old one, a fragile piece maintained by a strict regimen of unanswered phone calls and deleted voicemails. She threw herself into her work at the Orpheum Grand, the patient, methodical restoration of the theater becoming a balm for her fractured spirit. In the evenings, she'd go to her pottery studio, the feeling of wet clay spinning beneath her hands, a grounding force, a way to create something whole and beautiful out of a formless lump. It was her own quiet act of conservation. Her family, of course, did not understand silence. They saw it as a void to be filled with their own noise. Her mother, Carol, left a series of voicemails that ran the emotional gamut from saccharine pleading, "We miss you, sweetie. The house is so empty without you," to sharp, guilt-laced commands. "Your brother is having a hard enough time as it is, Ilara. The least you could do is show some support." Liam, showing a breathtaking lack of remorse, sent a single text. "Thanks for the help, Ellie. Things are going to be back to normal soon." Back to normal. For Liam, normal was a state of consequence-free living, a world cushioned by the sacrifices of others. For Ilara, normal was a dream she had paid for and buried. She never replied. She saved the $85,000 receipt from the bank and the signed promissory note in a lockbox in her closet, 2 halves of a bitter truth she couldn't yet bear to face. She was surviving, but she was not healing. The wound was too deep, and she knew, with a dull certainty, that it had been left to fester. Her first thought was that it was a mistake, a horrible, bureaucratic error. She had nothing to do with Liam's crimes. She was a victim of them, just like his investors. She spent a sleepless night rereading the document, the legal jargon swimming before her eyes, until it was meaningless. The next morning, her hands shaking, she called the number listed for the assistant district attorney, a woman named Catherine Rios. "Yes, Miss Vance, we've been wanting to speak with you," the ADA said, her voice professional and crisp. "I understand this must be a shock." "It's a mistake," Ilara said, pacing her small living room. "I don't know anything that could help you. I wasn't involved in my brother's business." There was a pause on the other end of the line, followed by the soft rustle of papers. "Actually, Miss Vance," ADA Rios said, her tone taking on a careful, deliberate edge, "you were. Are you aware of a joint savings account at Central Union Bank opened in both your name and your brother's name in June of 2011? Ilara stopped pacing. A cold fog filled her mind. A joint account? From high school? I think so. It was for a summer job we had. There can't be more than a few dollars in it. We haven't used it in over a decade." "There's more than a few dollars in it now," the ADA said grimly. "According to our forensic accountants, over the last 18 months, your brother funneled approximately $90,000 of embezzled funds through that account in a series of small, structured deposits designed to avoid federal reporting requirements. Because your name is on the account, you are a crucial witness to its history and dormancy. He used your identity, Miss Vance, to help launder stolen money." The phone nearly slipped from her hand.
The world tilted on its axis, the floor seeming to drop away beneath her feet. It wasn't just the bail money. It wasn't just the years of casual financial carelessness. This was different. This was a deliberate, calculated act of betrayal. Liam hadn't just taken from her. He had actively used her, twisting her name and her identity into a shield for his crimes. He had put her in the path of a felony investigation without a single word. "Miss Vance, are you still there?" "Yes," she whispered, sinking onto her sofa. "I'm here." "We'll need you to come in next week to give a formal statement," the ADA continued, her voice softening with a hint of sympathy. "I know this is difficult, but your testimony is vital to establishing your brother's pattern of deception." Ilara hung up the phone, the dial tone a shrill scream in the sudden, crushing silence of her apartment. The numbness was gone, replaced by a white-hot, blinding rage. She drove to her parents' house in a haze of fury, the subpoena a burning brand on the passenger seat beside her. She didn't call first, she used her old key and walked in, finding them in the living room with Liam, watching a football game as if it were any other Sunday afternoon. Liam looked up, a lazy smile on his face that evaporated the moment he saw her expression. "Ellie, what's wrong?" She didn't answer him. She threw the subpoena onto the coffee table between them. It landed with a sharp slap. "What the hell is this, Liam?" Her parents stared at the document. Carol picked it up, her brow furrowed in confusion. "What is it?" "It's a subpoena," Ilara said, her voice shaking with contained rage. "For me, to testify against him because he used me, Mom. He used our old joint bank account to launder the money he stole." Liam had the decency to look away, his gaze fixed on the television screen. He shrugged, a gesture of such profound cowardice it made Ilara's blood boil. "Not a big deal?" she shrieked, the sound tearing from her throat. "My name is tied to a federal crime, Liam. I had to talk to a district attorney this morning. They could have charged me as an accessory. Did you ever think about that?" "Don't be so dramatic," Carol snapped, her fear instantly curdling into aggression directed not at her criminal son, but at the daughter who was bringing bad news into her home. "Of course they're not going to charge you. You didn't do anything."
"That's not the point," Ilara yelled, turning on her mother. "The point is that he did it. He used me and he didn't care what happened to me." "Your brother was under a lot of pressure," her father said, finally speaking, his voice heavy with misplaced reason. "He made a mistake. We have to be smart about this now. We have to protect the family." Ilara stared at him, aghast. "Protect the family? He is the one who destroyed it." That was when the conversation turned. The fear in her parents' eyes solidified into a cold, terrifying resolve. Carol stepped toward her, her expression one Ilara had never seen before. It was hard, calculating, and utterly devoid of maternal warmth. "Listen to me, Ilara," her mother said, her voice dangerously low. "When you go to that office and when you get on that stand, you will be very careful about what you say. You don't remember that account very well. It was a long time ago. The details are foggy." Ilara felt a chill creep up her spine. "What are you saying?" "She's saying you need to protect your brother," David said, his tone leaving no room for argument. You will not be the reason he goes to prison." The implication was unmistakable, a monstrous, unthinkable demand hanging in the air between them. They wanted her to lie. They wanted her to commit perjury, a felony, to protect the son who had already implicated her in a felony of his own. That was the final fragmentation, the last stubborn thread of hope that somewhere, deep down, they loved her, that they had her best interests at heart, snapped with an audible finality inside her soul. They weren't just neglectful. They weren't just biased. They were willing to burn her to the ground to keep their golden boy warm. She looked from her mother's hard, merciless face to her father's grim resolve, and then to her brother, who was now staring at his hands, a coward to the very end. She saw them for what they were, a tribunal that had already judged her and sentenced her to be the final sacrifice. A horrifying, quiet laugh escaped her lips. "You would do that," she whispered, the realization a physical blow. "You would actually send me to jail to save him." "Don't be ridiculous," Carol hissed. "It won't come to that if you just do as you're told." Alara backed away slowly, shaking her head. The rage was gone, scoured away by a grief so profound it felt like dying. "No," she said, her voice hollow. She turned and walked out the door, away from the game on the television, away from the pristine beige house, away from the three people who had just revealed themselves to be complete and utter strangers.
She didn't remember the drive home. She found herself in her apartment, the lights off, the autumn darkness pressing in on the windows. She slid down the wall to the floor, her body racked with silent, shuddering sobs. This was it. This was rock bottom. A place beyond anger, beyond sadness. It was a desolate, empty void of betrayal. She was utterly and completely alone. She stayed on the floor for hours as the darkness deepened, the city lights beginning to glitter outside. She felt nothing. She was a building whose foundation had been dynamited, whose walls had collapsed inward, leaving nothing but a pile of dust and rubble. And then, through the haze of despair, a single thought pierced the darkness. Anya. Her phone was in her purse by the door. She crawled to it, her limbs heavy and uncooperative. She found the number and pressed call, her thumb shaking so badly it took 3 tries. Anya answered immediately. "Alara?" Alara opened her mouth, but only a choked, broken sound came out. "Alara, what is it? What happened?" Anya's voice was sharp with alarm. Somehow, in ragged, halting whispers, she told her everything. The subpoena, the joint account, the confrontation, and the final monstrous demand that she lie under oath. There was a dead silence on the other end of the line. It stretched for a full 10 seconds. When Anya finally spoke, her voice was stripped of all warmth. It was the voice of a lawyer who had just been handed a declaration of war. "They asked you to commit perjury." It wasn't a question. It was a statement of fact, cold and hard as a block of granite. "To save the son who already made you an unwitting accomplice?" "Okay, what do I do, Anne?" Alara wept, the tears finally coming hot and fast. "They've taken everything. I have nothing left." "Stop," Anya commanded, her voice cutting through the hysteria. "You stop that right now. You listen to me. They haven't taken everything. You have the truth. And you have a signed, notarized promissory note. Did you forget about your armor?" "What good is it?" Alara sobbed. "It's just money. They want to destroy my life." "No," Anya said, her voice ringing with a conviction that seemed to reach through the phone and grab hold of Alara's failing spirit. "It is not just money. It is leverage. It is power. It is a legal firewall. The moment you sent me that scanned copy, I filed a UCC lien against their property with the county clerk. Their house, their single biggest asset, the stage for their perfect little life, is legally encumbered. They can't sell it. They can't take out a second mortgage to pay for Liam's legal fees. They cannot leverage 1 cent of its value without paying you in full first. They are trapped, Alara. They just don't know it yet." Alara's sobs began to quiet. A lien. A legal chain she had wrapped around the foundation of their lives without them even knowing it. The knowledge was a spark in the desolate void. "They think they hold all the cards," Anya continued, her voice relentless. "They think you are a pawn they can sacrifice, but they are wrong. You are not a pawn. You are the key witness for the prosecution, and you are their primary creditor. You hold all the power. You just need to decide how to use it." Ilara pushed herself up from the floor, her body aching. She walked to the window and looked down at the street below, at the headlights of cars moving with purpose through the night. The despair, so absolute just moments before, began to recede. In its place, something else was rising. It was cold and unfamiliar. It was the righteous, terrifying anger of a woman who had finally, truly been pushed too far. The fragmentation was over. The awakening had begun. She looked at her own faint reflection in the dark glass. The tear tracks were still on her face, but her eyes were different. They were no longer the eyes of a victim. They were the eyes of a witness, and a creditor, and a survivor. "Okay," she whispered into the phone, her voice steady for the first time all day. "Okay. What do we do next?" The morning after the awakening was unnervingly quiet. The storm of her emotions had passed, leaving behind a landscape that was stark, clear, and frighteningly new. There was no grief left, only a cold, hard clarity. Ilara sat at her small kitchen table, the early morning light casting long shadows across the floor, and picked up her phone. It felt different in her hand. No longer a tether to her family's whims, but a tool. With a methodical precision that would have served her well restoring a delicate fresco, she began to build her walls. She opened her contacts list. Her finger hovered for a moment over the entry for Mom, a name that now seemed like a title from a story about someone else. She tapped Block this caller. A confirmation prompt appeared. "Are you sure?" For a single, fleeting second, a ghost of her former self, the dutiful daughter, recoiled. Then she thought of her mother's hard, merciless eyes demanding she commit a felony, and she pressed block without hesitation. Next came Dad, block. Then Liam, block. She moved on to social media, her actions just as swift and decisive. She navigated the labyrinth of privacy settings, unfriending and blocking the three of them, then pruning her list of the flying monkeys, the aunts, cousins, and family friends who had always served as her mother's unwitting surveillance network. Each click was a snip of a cord, a severing of a tie that had bound her for 28 years. When she was finished, she set the phone down. The silence in her apartment was no longer empty. It was clean. It was the sound of her own sovereignty. In the weeks that followed, Ilara dedicated herself to the meticulous work of reclaiming her life. The process was like one of her own conservation projects, slow, deliberate, and focused on reinforcing the core structure. Her work at the Orpheum Grand became her truest sanctuary. High on the scaffolding, with the city a distant hum below, she could lose herself for hours in the delicate act of restoration. Her mentor, Mr. Henderson, a man with kind eyes and plaster dust permanently embedded in the lines of his hands, seemed to sense the shift in her. "There's a new focus in your work, Ilara," he commented one afternoon, inspecting a section of cornice she had just stabilized. "A fierceness. Everything all right at home?" The old Ilara would have deflected, murmuring a vague reassurance. The new Ilara took a breath and offered a sliver of the truth. "I'm dealing with a serious family issue, Mr. Henderson. I'm having to build some new, stronger walls." He nodded slowly, his gaze full of a paternal understanding her own father had never possessed. He gently touched the century-old plaster beside her. "This theater has survived fires, floods, and the wrecking ball," he said, his voice soft. "Its strength isn't just in the bricks and mortar. It's in its core design, its foundation. Find yours, my dear, and don't be afraid to protect it." Her words became her mantra. She took them home with her. She deep-cleaned her apartment, not as a chore, but as an exorcism. She packed away old photographs of family holidays, gifts that felt more like obligations, and trinkets that carried the ghost of a conditional love. She rearranged the furniture, breaking the old lines of sight, creating new spaces that were entirely her own. She was renovating her life.
Her pottery club, once a pleasant hobby, became a vital part of her new foundation. The easy camaraderie and shared passion were an antidote to the toxic isolation of her family. One evening, as she struggled to center a particularly stubborn lump of clay, her friend Chloe laughed. "You're fighting it too hard," Chloe said, her own hands effortlessly shaping a graceful bowl. "You have to guide it, not force it." Alara looked down at the messy, wobbling clay, then at her own tense hands. She took a breath, relaxed her grip, and tried again. Slowly, miraculously, the clay rose beneath her touch, forming a clean, symmetrical cylinder. A genuine, unforced joy spread across her face. It was the first time she had felt uncomplicated joy in months. She was learning to guide her own life, not just fight against the one that had been forced upon her. But the distant war had just begun. A family as accustomed to control as hers did not accept silence gracefully. They interpreted it as a challenge. The first salvo came in the form of a series of voicemails. Having found their numbers blocked, her mother resorted to calling from her hairdresser's salon, her friend's phone, any number she could find. Curious and strangely detached, Ilara listened to one. The recording was a masterclass in manipulation. It began with a trembling, tearful plea. "Ilara, honey? It's Mom. I am so worried about you. We haven't heard from you in weeks. Please, just call me. Let me know you're okay." The concern quickly curdled into guilt. "Your brother is a nervous wreck. His trial is looming and his sister has abandoned him. This entire family is falling apart. Is this really what you want? To be the one who destroys us?" Finally, it crescendoed into a low, threatening bitterness. "I don't know who you've become, but you are making a terrible mistake, Ilara. A mistake you will regret for the rest of your life." The old Ilara would have crumpled. She would have been consumed by guilt, her resolve dissolving under the heat of her mother's practice histrionics. But the woman listening to the message now was different. She heard not a mother's pain, but a narcissist's rage. She heard the desperate tactics of a puppeteer who had discovered her strings were cut. When the message ended, Ilara calmly deleted it and blocked the new number. The poison had no effect. She was developing an immunity. The second salvo was more insidious. At pottery class a week later, her friend Chloe approached her, hesitantly, her phone in her hand. "Hey, I don't want to pry, but my cousin is friends with your Aunt Carol, and she shared this post. I just thought you should see it." She showed Ilara the screen. The post was from her mother's sister, but the sentimental, overwrought prose was unmistakably Carol's. It was a public performance of grief, complete with a soft focus photo of Liam and Ilara as children. "My heart is breaking for my sister's family. As they face their darkest hour, they are suffering a second, private tragedy. We ask for prayers for our dear nephew Liam as he fights for his future, and for our dear niece Ilara, that she may find her way back to the loving family that misses her. It is a terrible thing when a child turns their back on their own blood in their time of greatest need." Mortification, hot and sharp, was her first instinct. The shame was a reflex, a phantom limb of her old life. She felt the powerful urge to defend herself, to type out a furious reply detailing the slap, the subpoena, the extortion.
Then she remembered Anya's words from a late-night phone call. "Let them scream into the void, Ilara. Their narrative only has power over you if you participate in it. Starve it of oxygen." She took a deep breath and handed the phone back to Chloe. "Thank you for showing me," she said, her voice even. "It's a complicated situation." And then, before Chloe could ask another question, she smiled and said, "Hey, can you help me with that glazing technique you were using last week? I can't get the consistency right." It was one of the hardest things she had ever done, but in changing the subject, she had won. She had refused to be drawn into their drama. She had let their public performance of her betrayal play out to an empty theater. The final desperate attempt to breach her walls was the most brazen. One afternoon, as she was carefully applying gold leaf to a rosette on the theater's proscenium arch, one of the younger apprentices called up to her. "Ilara, there's a guy here asking for you, says he's your brother." Her blood ran cold. This was her sanctuary. He had no right. She looked down from the scaffolding and saw Liam standing in the center aisle, looking small and out of place in the cavernous, dust-sheeted space. Before she could even formulate a response, she saw Mr. Henderson emerge from his office, wiping his hands on a rag. He walked calmly but purposefully toward Liam. "Can I help you?" Mr. Henderson asked, his tone polite but firm. "I'm here to see my sister, Ilara Vance," Liam said, trying to inject some of his old charm into his voice. "Ms. Vance is in the middle of a complex and delicate project," Mr. Henderson replied, not raising his voice, but somehow managing to command the entire space. He positioned himself squarely between Liam and the scaffolding. "This is a work site, and she is not to be disturbed. I'm going to have to ask you to leave." "Look, I just need to talk to her for a minute," Liam insisted, taking a step forward. Mr. Henderson didn't move. "That won't be possible," he said, his voice dropping an octave, losing all its warmth. "Leave. Now." Liam, who had built his life on charm and the assumption of compliance from others, seemed genuinely stunned to be confronted with a simple, unyielding no. He faltered, looked up at Ilara with a pleading expression, and then, under Mr. Henderson's stony gaze, he turned and walked out of the theater. From her perch high above, she watched the entire exchange, her heart filled with a fierce, protective gratitude. Mr. Henderson had not asked for an explanation. He had not questioned her. He had simply seen a boundary being threatened and had enforced it without hesitation. He had protected her foundation.
A month passed in tense, blessed silence. The voicemails stopped. There were no more public posts. Ilara allowed herself to hope that perhaps they had finally given up, that they had accepted her withdrawal from their lives. She was beginning to feel the first real shoots of a new, peaceful existence. Then the letter came. It arrived with the regular mail, but it stood out immediately. It was a thick, cream-colored envelope bearing the official seal of the County District Attorney's Office. It was addressed to her by certified mail, requiring her signature. Her hands were perfectly steady as she signed the postman's device and took the envelope. She walked into her apartment, closed the door, and leaned against it for a moment, the heavy paper cool against her fingers. This was it. The quiet was over. She opened it with a letter opener, a deliberate, unhurried motion. Inside was a multi-page document. It was a finalized trial schedule for The People v. Liam Vance. The trial was set to begin on Monday, November 24th, 4 weeks from today. She scanned the pages, her eyes finding her own name on the witness list. Catherine Rios, Assistant District Attorney, anticipates calling the following witnesses for the prosecution on day 2 of the trial, Tuesday, November 25th. Mr. Robert Chen, investor. Miss Julia Finch, investor. Ms. Ilara Vance, witness. She read the line again. Ms. Ilara Vance, witness. There was no fear. There was no panic. The woman who had wept on the floor of this very apartment just a few months ago was gone. In her place stood a conservator, a woman who knew the value of a solid foundation and who was now prepared to protect her own. She folded the letter and placed it on her desk, next to the brochure for a different cottage she had started looking at online. A smaller, more modest place, but one that would be entirely hers. The distant war was over. The date for the final confrontation was set, and for the first time in her life, Ilara Vance was ready for the fight.
The morning of the trial was unnaturally bright, the November sun casting long, sharp shadows across the courthouse steps. Ilara stood at the base of the wide granite stairs, taking a slow, steadying breath. The air was cold and clean in her lungs. She was not alone. Anya stood beside her, a bastion of calm, professional confidence in a dark gray suit. A few feet away, Mr. Henderson waited patiently, his presence a quiet, unshakable vote of confidence. He had simply appeared at her apartment that morning with 2 cups of coffee and said, "No one should have to face a day like this by themselves." As they walked through the security checkpoint and into the marble-floored atrium, she saw them. Her family was huddled together near the entrance to courtroom 4B, a tight, miserable knot of black and gray. Liam, looking pale and shrunken in a suit that seemed a size too big, stared at the floor. Her father's face was a stony mask of resentment, his shoulders slumped in defeat. Her mother, however, was a live wire of pure, unadulterated fury. Her eyes, red-rimmed and narrowed, found Ilara across the hall and held her in a glare of such venomous hatred that the old Ilara would have physically recoiled. But the old Ilara was gone. This Ilara, flanked by her chosen family, simply met her mother's gaze. She did not smile, nor did she scowl. She held her mother's stare for a long, silent moment, and then she gave a single, almost imperceptible nod, a dispassionate acknowledgement of a stranger, before turning her attention to Anya. The power in that small, simple act was immense. She had refused to be the emotional battleground. She had refused to play the game. When the bailiff called her name a few hours later, she walked toward the witness stand with a straight back and a steady gait. The room was a blur of polished wood and serious faces. She avoided looking at the defendant's table, focusing instead on the clerk who administered the oath. She placed her hand on the Bible and swore to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. The words felt less like an oath and more like a simple statement of fact. For the first time, the truth was all she had left to offer. Assistant District Attorney Catherine Rios approached the stand, her expression businesslike but not unkind. The questioning began, each query a simple, factual brick being laid in the foundation of the prosecution's case. "Miss Vance, would you please state your relationship to the defendant, Liam Vance?" "He is my brother," Ilara said, her voice clear and even, echoing slightly in the hushed courtroom. "Can you tell the court about a joint savings account at Central Union Bank, opened in both your names?" "Yes, we opened it when we were teenagers for a summer job. I had not used it or thought about it in more than 10 years. Were you aware that between January of last year and June of this year, a series of deposits totaling over $90,000 were made into this account?" "No, I was not." ADA Rios walked the jury through bank statements projected on a large screen, each one showing a deposit of a few $1,000s, the embezzled funds, followed quickly by a withdrawal, a digital trail leading directly to Liam's personal accounts. Through it all, Ilara remained calm. She was a conservator, presenting her findings on a structurally compromised building, detailing the cracks, the rot, the hidden decay. The defense attorney's cross-examination was designed to splinter her composure. He was a florid, aggressive man who tried to paint her as a vindictive, scorned sister. "Miss Vance, isn't it true that you had a falling out with your family over money just prior to your brother's arrest?" "I gave my family $85,000 for my brother's bail bond," she replied, her tone factual. "A gift you later came to regret?" he pressed. It was a loan. I have a signed promissory note to that effect." A murmur went through the courtroom. The lawyer, momentarily thrown, tried another tack. "So you're testifying against your own brother out of financial spite?" Elora finally turned her head and looked not at the lawyer, but at the 12 jurors sitting in the box. I am testifying because I received a subpoena and because I swore an oath to tell the truth. That is what I have done. She was dismissed moments later. As she stepped down from the stand, she allowed herself a single, fleeting glance at her brother. He was staring at her, his face a mixture of disbelief and a dawning, terrifying understanding. He had built his life on a foundation of lies, and she, the silent, reliable pillar of his support system, had just calmly and methodically knocked it all down with the simple, devastating weight of the truth.
They cornered her in a quiet hallway near the building's west exit. Ilara and Anya were walking toward the doors when her mother's voice, a low, venomous hiss, cut through the air. "You did it." Ilara stopped and turned. Carol stood before her, her face a contorted mask of rage. David and Liam flanked her, a portrait of familial ruin. "You actually stood up there and you handed your own brother to the wolves," her mother seethed. "Your own flesh and blood." "I told the truth, Mom," Ilara said, her voice devoid of the anger and pain that had once consumed her. It was simply weary. "You've destroyed this family," her father blurted out, his face flushed. "After everything we've done for you, all the sacrifices we made, I hope you're happy." Liam, his brief flicker of understanding extinguished by sheer desperation, stepped forward. "Ellie, please," he begged, his voice cracking. "You can still fix this. You can talk to the judge, tell them you were confused, that you made a mistake." Ilara looked at the three of them, the manipulator, the enabler, and the golden child, and felt a profound and final sense of release. They were not capable of change. They would forever see her not as a person, but as a function, a tool to be used for their own needs. And she was finally, irrevocably, done. "No," she said, the single word a closed door. She looked at Liam. "You made your choices." She looked at her father. "The only sacrifice you ever made was me." And finally, she looked at her mother. "I didn't destroy this family," she said, her voice as cold and clear as the November air. "Your choices did. Your lies did. You asked me for my savings, and I gave it to you. Then you demanded my integrity, and you were surprised when I refused. There is nothing left for you to take from me." "But we're your family!" Carol cried, her voice rising with a last desperate surge of manipulative pathos. "What will you have without us? You'll have nothing." Ilara held her mother's gaze for a long moment. She thought of the sleepless nights, the constant anxiety, the weight of their expectations, and the dream she had given up. And then she thought of the signed document in her lockbox.
"No, Mom," she said, the words precise and devastatingly calm. "You have nothing. The $85,000 was a loan. The promissory note you signed is legally binding, and the lien on your house is in place. You will pay your debt." She turned her back on them then. With Anya at her side, she walked toward the doors, not looking back, not flinching as her mother let out a choked, furious sob. She pushed open the heavy glass door and stepped out into the bright, cold sunlight, leaving the shadows of the courthouse and her family behind her for good. Epilogue. 1 year later. The autumn light, golden and warm, streamed through the large, newly glazed window of the cottage workshop. It illuminated the dancing dust motes and the rich grain of the reclaimed oak windowsill Ilara was carefully sanding. The cottage was smaller than the one she had first dreamed of, nestled on a quiet country lane with a crooked porch and a stubborn climbing rose that refused to be tamed. It was perfect. A smear of wood stain decorated her cheek, and her overalls were covered in a fine layer of sawdust. On a nearby table, a row of beautifully imperfect pottery bowls cooled, their glazes shining. She was humming, a quiet, tuneless sound of pure contentment. 6 months ago, a wire transfer for the final balance of $85,000 had appeared in her bank account. The subject line simply read, "Proceeds from sale of property." She had used it for the down payment on this place. She had heard, through the distant grapevine of Anya's legal contacts, that Liam had been convicted and sentenced to a minimum of 3 years in a state prison. His parents had sold the pristine colonial house, their stage set for a perfect life, and moved into a small condo across town. She didn't know the details, and she felt no desire to find out. Their story was no longer hers to read. She finished her sanding, wiping the smooth wood with the palm of her hand. It was solid. The foundation of this little house was stone, and it was strong.
The doorbell chimed. She climbed down from her stepladder and opened the door to find Anya holding a bottle of champagne and Mr. Henderson holding a framed antique map of the county from 1890. "A proper housewarming is long overdue," Anya announced, sweeping past her into the cottage. "I thought this old place should know its own history," Mr. Henderson said with a warm smile, handing her the map. Ilara's heart felt so full it might burst. "Thank you," she said, her voice thick with an emotion she now recognized as pure, unadulterated happiness. Come in. Let me show you what I've been working on." Later, the three of them sat on the newly reinforced porch, drinking champagne as the sun set, painting the sky in brilliant strokes of orange and purple. They talked of work and pottery and Mr. Henderson's plans for his garden next spring. It was an easy, peaceful conversation, the kind shared between people bound not by obligation or blood, but by genuine affection and respect. Ilara leaned back in her chair, the cool glass of champagne in her hand, and looked at the faces of her chosen family, their features bathed in the warm glow of her new home. This was the life she had built, not the one she had dreamed of, but something far better, something real, something she had not been given, but had earned. It was a life with a solid foundation, strong walls, and a door she could open to whomever she chose. And for the first time, it was a life entirely and peacefully her own.